بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. As mentioned when speaking about Malcolm X rahimahullah ta'ala, to do justice to these great individuals would take many weeks of study and speaking, as there are many lessons that can be taken from the lives of these men, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and others. We don't realize the greatness of these men. We don't realize the greatness of these people until we actually read about them and study them. And we sometimes see them to be, as Muhammad Ali, for example, most people said, a boxer, sports personality. But no one sees him as being an activist, a political activist, a man who made change, an icon for standing up against the establishment when the establishment is wrong. He was a great individual. And in regards to Black History Month, celebrating the great personalities that make up the history of, you could say, those that are black, maybe, is something which is an honor for anyone to do. But every day is a day of celebration when we speak about the history of Islam, regardless of the color of the person. You'll find, when you read through the history of Islam, you'll find that they were black, they were yellow, they were white, some of them were brown, some of them were paler than others, some of them darker than others. But it's not the skin that made them who they were. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, the best of you with Allah are the most pious, the most God conscious. And you truly find when you read into these people's lives that it was the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that made them special. There were people that were better than them at what they were doing. There were people that were more skilled than them at what they were doing. For example, Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah ta'ala, it could perhaps be argued that there were some boxers in his time that were better than him, stronger than him. But was it his skills and his sports achievements that made him stand out? When we read through his life story, we'll find that it was not. And the same can be said for everyone that you read about. It's not the skills or the abilities that they have. It was a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that made these men who they were. And we will come to see something about Muhammad Ali rahimahullah. As an example, I'll say it before we get there. He was drafted into the army at a later age in his life. But the American army at that time, they had a system where they would draft people from a young age. He was turned down, and he was not drafted into the army due to his lack of literacy skills. They quoted him as being weak in spelling and weak in literacy. But yet, he was known for what? What was one of the things that Muhammad Ali was known for? For his wordplay, for getting his message across. And so, a weakness did not stop him. It wasn't the strengths that pushed him forward. It was the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in the same style that we did with Malcolm X rahimahullah, we'll briefly go through a short timeline of his life and then go through some lessons that we can take from some of the events that unfolded during his lifetime. So he was born in 1942 in Kentucky, and at the age of 12 years old he got into boxing, into amateur boxing. There's a famous story which is mentioned. Why did he get into boxing? There's a famous story mentioned that someone stole his bicycle. And so when the person had stolen his bicycle, he became angered. And a police officer spoke to him, and this police officer himself was a trainer, a boxing trainer. And he said to the police officer, when I catch him, I'm going to basically give him a beating. And the police officer said to him, well, you better learn to box if you want to do that. And he not exactly directly through this police officer, but yeah, Muhammad Ali had his bike stolen. So Muhammad Ali's bike was stolen by someone, and due to that, he got into boxing. So due to the fact that something bad had happened, something great came. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, perhaps you may dislike something, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place something better in that which you dislike. And so Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah, due to his bike being stolen, got into boxing. And it's not the boxing that makes Muhammad Ali special, as we'll come to see. 1954, that was when he started boxing. Sorry, he made his amateur debut in 1954. And in 1960, at the age of 18 years old, he won a gold medal in the Olympics in Rome at the time. And in 1962, he met Malcolm X. So in a very short period of time, you can see that he's going through a lot of changes. And in 1964, at the age of 22 years old, he beat the champion of the world at the time, the heavyweight champion of the world, Sonny Liston. And Sonny Liston, I'm not a sports commentator, I'm not a boxing critic, so I'm not going to give you my opinions on the fighters, and we're here for another reason. But Sonny Liston was a very good fighter. In fact, all of the boxers in that time were something else in comparison to what came after them. And it has a benefit in mentioning, as we'll see. You see that Muhammad Ali fought the likes of Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, George Foreman. And when you look at these men, they're not like the boxers of today. With no disrespect, the boxers of today, I'm sure they'll teach me a lesson or two. But when you compare them and you compare the boxers of yesterday, they're not on the same level. And you look at the fights that these men would go through. Muhammad Ali, for example, fought Joe Frazier and George Foreman in the same year. And fought Joe Frazier twice, and then George Foreman in the space of 2 years. This shows you something about the heart that this man held, the heart that this man had. So in 1960, he won the gold medal. In 1962, he met Malcolm X, and we'll come to talk about these events in more detail shortly, inshallah. 1964, he won the WBA, WBC, and the lineal heavyweight championship from Sonny Liston. And there's something that I think is worth mentioning here. There's a famous interview that took place with Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah, and they were discussing him as a personality, and they brought on some famous people at the time to celebrate him and talk about him. This was in his youth, and they had a comedian come, and they were speaking to the comedian. And the comedian made a joke. He said, if I were to leave off pork and alcohol and pray 5 times a day, I'll probably be the heavyweight champion of the world myself. And so look at the impact of the lifestyle that Muhammad Ali had on his achievements as a man. At a young age, the lifestyle that he had and he led had a great impact on his achievements. And this was later attributed to some of the teachings of Islam. In 1966, he entered into the Nation of Islam, and we said in 1962 he met Malcolm X. He became friends with Malcolm X. Some ascribed Malcolm X to being his spiritual leader and advisor. And when he won the heavyweight championship from Sonny Liston, he spent the night with Malcolm X. He spent the night celebrating with Malcolm X. No drinking, no pork, no haram. He was living a very clean lifestyle at that time. And so he entered into the Nation of Islam in 1966. He changed his name at that time to Cassius X. And the X representing a lack of understanding of the lineage of a person. Malcolm X, even when he came back from Hajj, and his name by on the passport, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, he would still refer to himself and like to be referred to himself as Malcolm X. The reason being is he said the X represents not having a way back to our lineage, not knowing where our forefathers come from. And we mentioned previously that this is very important, not the X. What is very important is knowing where we came from. As a man that comes from a lineage of kings will aspire to be a king. A man that comes from a lineage of changers will aspire to be a change maker. A man that doesn't know where he came from, he'll try to be whatever he sees in front of him. And so today, for example, you see amongst us in our communities, whether black, Asian, Arab, white, we see that because we don't know where we came from, we aspire to be lowly people that we see around us. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, those people are drug dealers, robbers, those that call themselves gangsters, lowly people, petty crooks. But if they were to look deeper into their lineage, they would see perhaps that they came from something great. He changed his name to Cassius X, and then later on he changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And this is the year in which he refused the draft, the military draft, to go and fight in Vietnam. And this in of itself,
He named himself Muhammad Ali by this time.
the name was given to him, but he had become known as Muhammad Ali in 1966 after Cassius X. And so he was drafted into the military in this year as well, and he refused the military draft. At the time, America was going to Vietnam, a war which they lost, of course, and it caused them substantial losses, and this was the start of, you could say, bad media representation for America. They were seen as the oppressors and so on and so forth. But anyway, he refused the draft. And now, when he refused this draft, you have to remember, he was young, wealthy, had fame, had status, he was loved, and he was accepted by not only the establishment, when we say the establishment, meaning the media, but also by society. At this time, he was living in a very racially prejudiced time, and the environment was very prejudiced. And so for a black man to be accepted by white people was something that many black people at the time were seeking after, due to the circumstances of the situation. Even though he had been accepted, and even though he had acquired wealth and status and fame, he gave this all up. For what? To stand up for his principles. When he refused the military draft, he cited the reason for refusing the military draft being that it goes against his principles. It goes against his religion. He says that we only stand up for Allah and His Messenger, and this is not for Allah and His Messenger. And so I'm not going to go to Vietnam and fight against the Vietnamese. He says, they haven't done me any wrong. And he went further and said, in fact, the white people in this country, meaning America at the time, have done me more harm than the Vietnamese. So why would I go and fight a white war? So he wasn't afraid to stand up for the social injustices of the time, even though he had status and fame and position. And so a question can be asked, what are we standing up for? Islam has given us principles, and we have positions in society. Regardless of what that position is, what are we standing up for? In fact, how many of us, when we're confronted with a situation in which we have to choose between our Islamic principles and pleasing our manager at work, we choose to please our manager at work? And this, look at the status that Muhammad Ali was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his later life. Man taraka shay'an lillahi awadahu Allahu khayran min. Whoever leaves off something for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will give him something better. And so he refused the military draft. He was arrested and charged, and he was stripped of his titles, and he was stripped of his boxing licenses. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. He paid, and he was allowed to be free whilst he was appealing the charges against him. He started the appeal immediately, and it was in 1971 that the ruling was overturned. So between 1966 to 1971, he wasn't fighting. He had no licenses. He had no source of income. The media had become his enemy. Imagine all of those that were supporting you financially, they're going to withdraw their financial backing for you. Why? Because now you're going against the norms of society. You're not conforming to what the powers that be want you to conform to. And so this was a very big decision that he made. And it shows once again the heart of a champion, a person who doesn't give in, and a person who is firm. So in 1971 his ruling was overturned, and in 1972, similar to Malcolm X, rahimahullah, he performed Hajj. And Hajj was one of the things that had an influence over him in regards to him seeing the reality of the nation of Islam and their falsehood in calling to a black type of cultism. And so he performed Hajj, and he was impacted by that which he saw in Hajj, the brotherhood, the unity, the different complexions all coming together. And when you think about Hajj, it's something amazing. You have how many millions of people all going to one place to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Different colors, different ethnicities, different cultures, wearing the same robe, turning to the same qibla, performing the same actions. This is unity. And when you look to the equivalent, for example, of congregations in other places, they can't congregate in other places except with fights breaking out, confrontations breaking out, lack of unity. And so this is something great. And it shows you the power of Islam. Islam unites the hearts. And when you think about the brotherhood of Islam, it's something amazing. In fact, someone today, a lady came and she mentioned one of the things that drew her into Islam. She came to take her shahada. She didn't take it yet. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide her and give her the tawfiq. She mentioned one of the things that pulled her into Islam was the unity that she sees the Muslims upon. And sometimes we take it for granted, the unity that Islam provides us. So after regaining his boxing licenses, he went on to restart his boxing career. And a sports critic at the time, during the lifetime of Muhammad Ali, he said something interesting. Or I believe he was a trainer. He said that Muhammad Ali was robbed of his prime years, his prime sports years, whilst his license was taken away. And this statement, I think, is perhaps disputable. So I would like to ask a question. Do you agree with this? Muhammad Ali, he was robbed of his prime years as an athlete, meaning that between the age of 24 to roughly 28, 29, he wasn't permitted to fight. So were they the prime years of Muhammad Ali?
No, they were the years of which he felt that he lost from, or having come to the way that he was later in life with Parkinson's, then looking back over life and saying, had he had them years, maybe things wouldn't have transpired to be, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there was those times were good for him in terms of spiritual enrichment.
And I would like to add as well, in terms of the Parkinson's disease, it's whatever Allah has written for you. For example, you see so many boxers who probably got hurt far worse than Muhammad Ali, and they never got Parkinson's disease.
No, but that you could dispute that because of he had 2 fights with Joe Frazier and a fight with George Foreman. In 2 of those fights, he was using the technique that the rope-a-dope that he called. So that's something else anyway. But what I'm saying is that what do we determine as being prime years? Is it the years that determine what prime is, or is it the actions that determine what prime is? It's the actions. So perhaps a person will be 60 years old and he's in the prime years of his life. We can't say that a person between 24 and 28 is in the prime of his life. It depends what we're looking at. The Prophet ﷺ, when did prophethood come to him? Prophethood came to him before the age of 40, but revelation came to him. He was a prophet from day one. He had the akhlaq of a prophet. For this reason, those that entered into Islam around him knew that he was a prophet. Khadija, Abu Bakr, Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu ta'ala anhum jami'an, and others. But what we can say is that it is the actions that define the years, not the years that define the actions. And so perhaps a person at the age of 60 will achieve great things, and those will be deemed to be his prime years. And so a person should never look back at what his life has been. He should look forward at what his life will become. It's not about what was, it's about what will be. And remember the hadith that we mentioned previously, من جاءه الموت وهو يطلب العلم ليحيي به الإسلام كان بينه وبين الأنبياء في الجنة درجة واحدة. Narration mentioned in Sunan al-Darimi. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever is upon the path of seeking knowledge and death comes to him, and the intention whilst he was seeking knowledge was to revive with that knowledge Islam, there will be one level between him and the Anbiya, the prophets in paradise. The Prophet ﷺ didn't mention anything about age. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned about the intention. Why was he doing this act? And talab al-ilm has no beginning and no end. And regardless of talab al-ilm or something else, يعني a person, his channel that he benefits the ummah through may be other than seeking knowledge. But the point being that it's about the intention and about the actions. I believe it was Ibn Aqil or Ibn al-Jawzi, one of the two, or perhaps it was someone else. He mentioned he was in his 80s, and he started to study ilm al-qira'at, the science of the modes of recitation. This was an alim. He was an alim in many sciences, but at the age of 80, he started to study the science of the modes of recitation. And so, it's not about the age; it's about the actions that are that come with the age. And so, I think this is important to take into consideration. So, in 1974, he fought against Joe Frazier. And Joe Frazier, he lost the first fight, and in the same year they had a rematch, and Muhammad Ali won. And in this fight, he came up with something, a technique that is now called the rope-a-dope, which was very unconventional, where he basically he sat against the ropes, not sat but stood against the ropes, and allowed Joe Frazier to keep hitting him. And the reason why is because he no longer had his speed, and he no longer had the reflexes that he had in his youth. But look, once again, the heart that this man had. He could have easily said, this is too much for me. But he lost, he came back. And he developed a new style to deal with the problem that he had in front of him, who at the time was Joe Frazier. He didn't quit. He developed a new style. And he got past Joe Frazier. Same with George Foreman, the famous Rumble in the Jungle. And George Foreman, there's a similarity between a fight with George Foreman and a fight with Sonny Liston, and a very a big benefit for me personally, and I hope it's a benefit for others as well. If anyone's read about those two fights, they'll find that those that were talking about the fights at the time, when Muhammad Ali, 22 years old, coming up against Sonny Liston, who was, the greatest fighter of that time and undisputed, they were all knocking Muhammad Ali off, saying that there's no way that Muhammad Ali is going to cause any harm to this man. He's not going to win, and so on and so forth. It was complete shunning of Muhammad Ali, his chances, rahimahullah. But what happened? He proved them all wrong. He didn't take notice, and he didn't take any note of that which was being said about him. He continued to train. He had a goal in mind. He went for it, and he achieved it. And perhaps someone could say this was a one-off, but he did the same with George Foreman. George Foreman, when Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah, he was asked about the fight, they asked him, what was it like? He said, it's the closest thing to death of my knowledge. And they asked him, have you watched the rematch tapes? He said, why would I go back to hell?
Who's that?
Muhammad Ali, about the fight I had with George Foreman, because of the amount of pain that George Foreman was inflicting upon him. And he was known to be a heavy hitter. In fact, some call him the heaviest hitter of boxing history, George Foreman in his prime. And as we said, we're not coming to talk about boxing, but there's a meaning behind it. They ripped Muhammad Ali off. Even some of his closest friends who had known Muhammad Ali for his whole career, and they'd been alongside Muhammad Ali for his whole career, they ripped him off and said he doesn't stand a chance. What did he do? He came and proved them wrong. And so once again, the heart of Muhammad Ali. And this is something which is very important, developing the heart. The heart is what gets people through things. The Sahaba, they had heart. No doubt they had heart. You're talking about a group of men that came up against the biggest empires of the time, the Roman and the Byzantine, Persian empires. They had the best of weapons. They had the most advanced military techniques. The Sahaba, some of them were sharing camels, sharing donkeys. Some of them, they didn't have shoes when they were fighting. Some of them, they were sharing weapons. But it was the heart that got them through. The iman, the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is something which is very important. So in 1974, he won the fight against George Foreman, Rumble in the Jungle. And in 1978, he lost to Leon Spinks. And they say that he didn't prepare for this fight at all, the fight with Spinks. He lost it. He came back and he won again. So he became the heavyweight champion of the world 3 times. He was the first to do so. the first in boxing history to do so. Others that came after him, they achieved this as well. In 1981, he retired a few times, but he kept coming back into the sport. In 1981, he fully retired, and he devoted his life, as in his own words, to Islam and to charity. He devoted his life to Islam and charity. And we forgot to mention, that he came out of the Nation of Islam in the 70s. The son of Elijah Muhammad, upon the passing away of Elijah Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad took the Nation of Islam into Sunni Islam. He later went back, Farah Khan took them back in, and he came back and gave life again to the Nation of Islam, or death I should say, gave death again to the Nation of Islam and took the life away from them. But Muhammad Ali remained upon Sunnism. He remained upon Sunni Islam, and so he devoted the rest of his life to charity work and to religion. And you can see, I'm sure many have seen the interviews where he speaks about Islam, and there's a famous interview, a young British reporter asks him about what is he going to do, and he starts to talk about the akhirah, the afterlife, and preparing for death. And you can see from a young age, Muhammad Ali was thinking about this. Even when he was in a state of having status and fame and wealth, he used his position, number one, to give da'wah. And number two, he was thinking about where he's going. He was thinking about the akhirah. He wasn't taken aback by his achievements. And so this is something we should relate to. Ask ourselves, what are we preparing for? How are we preparing for our akhirah? In 1984, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And we'll mention a few things. He lit the fire at the Olympics. He was an honorary flag bearer of the Olympics again after that. And in 2016, he passed away. That's a short biography of his life, short timeline. And this is his life generally, including some of his sporting achievements. Now, there's something else that I would like to go through, which is a political timeline. As many don't realize that Muhammad Ali, he was also a political activist from a young age. As we mentioned, in 1962, he met Malcolm X. And Malcolm X, he was a radical political activist in his time. And he became his spiritual and his political advisor. And many don't affiliate Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X together. The media don't mention their affiliation. And perhaps this is done purposefully. In fact, Malcolm X, he's not given the credit that he's due in the media. You often find when people are celebrating Black History Month or talking about Black History Month, who mentions Malcolm X? How often do you hear about Malcolm X when people talk about the movement for black rights in America? Malcolm X is not often mentioned. Why? Perhaps because of his Islam. Perhaps because of he was actually willing to make a change. He was willing to do what had to be done to make a change. And this was too radical for them.
And Muhammad Ali similar.
Yeah, Muhammad Ali was similar, but he took on a more passive type of style. And in 1964, joined the Nation of Islam, as we mentioned, and he started to travel and tour. He started to meet world leaders. We'll mention some of them. In 1974, he visited a Palestinian refugee camp in South Lebanon. And in that camp, he declared his support for the Palestinian people to liberate their homeland. How often is that cited? And today, some would say that hoping or supporting the Palestinians in the liberation of their homeland, this is radicalization or this is radical. But they don't call Muhammad Ali radical. This was the words of Muhammad Ali. And this is from a young age. He was supporting the Palestinian people, and he was not ashamed to do it. And it's something that you find a reoccurring theme with Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, that he was not scared and he did not fear stating his political opinions based upon his principles that he stood up for. And this is something, this is what we're going to see now. These are the reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised his rank. We'll see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised his rank not due to his boxing skills. There have been many boxers that could be arguably better than Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, but it wasn't due to the skills of his boxing, it was due to his commitment and his sacrifice. In 1966, he refused to be drafted into the army, as we mentioned previously, and this in itself is a big political statement. You're talking about, imagine the circumstances that Muhammad Ali did this now. we're talking about, let's call it white America. Yeah, because at that time, racism was still very prevalent. Racism was an everyday thing. So you're talking about a country in which a black man would struggle to find a job due to the color of his skin. He would be kicked out of places. In fact, there's a famous story that Muhammad Ali, when he came back from the Olympics, he tried to get something in a restaurant. He was told it's a white-only restaurant, and he threw his medal away. It's disputed. Some of his friends say this didn't really happen. Regardless, this is something that would happen on a daily basis. Same in the UK. In the UK, 40, 50, perhaps 60 years ago, you would find shop fronts. It would say no blacks, no dogs, and no Irish. And this was mentioned when we were speaking about Malcolm X, rahimahullah. When we argue and we discuss British values or Western values, we have to ask the question, what values are we talking about? Are we talking about the values of today or the values of yesterday? Are we talking about the values that will come tomorrow? Because what is the standard? What makes a value? Muhammad Ali, he stood up for the values that he had. And he made a very strong statement about this, which we'll read later on. So he refused the draft. Now, he lost his titles, he lost his status, he lost his wealth and his fame, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately raised his rank and he became an icon for anti-establishment. He became an icon and he started to do tours in colleges and tours in universities, and he started to give speeches for those that were anti-war. He became an icon for the anti-war movement. And in 1978, after his loss to Spinks, he visited Bangladesh. Is there anyone from Bangladesh here? Yeah, so Malcolm X, he's one of you, akhi. He was given an honorary citizenship. So he also had Bangladeshi citizenship. He was given honorary citizenship by Bangladesh. In 1980, listen to this, put this into context. He visited Kenya in 1980 and he convinced the Kenyan government to boycott the Moscow Olympics. Why? Because of the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. Imagine. And he used his status and he used his background to convince the Kenyan government not to participate in the Olympics in Moscow due to their invasion of Afghanistan. Look at how he was using his status to make achievements for the ummah. He wasn't, barakallahu feekum, he didn't retire and settle down, and no, he was using his status and what he had to try and benefit the ummah. He refused a military draft, that's a big thing, and now again he's putting himself on the line trying to convince a government not to get involved in a war. And he achieved this. How many of us use our positions and status to make achievements for the betterment of society, for the betterment of Islam, compared to going home and just being happy with a comfortable life? Muhammad Ali could have done so. He had the wealth, he had the means, he could have married as many women as he wanted if he so pleased. He could have had all of the houses and cars. He could have continued to be involved in financial endorsements, keep his pocket fat, but he didn't do so. He was involved in charitable work and political activism. So he convinced the Kenyan government to boycott the Moscow Olympics. In 1984, he announced his support for re-election of Ronald Reagan. This, I think, is something which is quite important for us. Why? What did he base this upon? He said that he is in support of Christian schools and that's enough for me. But due to the fact that he is in support of schools which teach about God, he said that's enough for me. And so he was standing up for principles which were, you could say, the lesser of two evils in the society that he was living in. And sometimes these decisions have to be made. In 1988, during the first Intifada in Palestine, Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he participated in a Chicago rally in support of Palestine. So you see, firstly, he declared his support for the liberation of the Palestinians' homeland, as he called it. And again, he was showing his support for the Palestinian people by being involved in a political rally. So once again, he was not afraid to show his political stances based upon his principles. In 1990, prior to the Gulf War, he secured the release of some American hostages that were being held in Iraq. And so again, using his status for political reasons. And 2002, he visited Afghanistan as a messenger of peace. So you can see that he was not only a sports personality, but he was also a political activist. He was involved in political change and he had an impact. And so again, the question arises, what are we doing? What are we using our positions and our statuses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us for? And no one should overlook and look down upon the position that he has. He may see it as something small in comparison to Muhammad Ali, but the change that he can make could be great. Look at the impact that the police officer, who you could say had a part to play in inspiring Muhammad Ali to become a boxer. If Muhammad Ali rahimahullah hadn't become a boxer, we wouldn't have been reading about him today. He wouldn't have made the changes that he made today. And as mentioned, it's not due to the fact that he was a boxer. It was due to his sacrifices and his commitment. And some lessons that we can take from his life. We mentioned his fight with Sonny Liston. The critics were against him, and the critics are not always right. We shouldn't always take note of what critics say. If something is correct, and we can apply that, we can contextualize that to the society that we're living in today. How many people are barking about Islam? How many critics do we have talking about the values of Islam and the Muslims? And the critics are not always right. We know what is right. We should work and struggle and strive towards achieving that what is right. And we will see the fruits and the benefits of this shortly, inshallah. The relationship with Malcolm X, rahimahullah, as was mentioned when we were speaking about Malcolm X, when he was asked about his relationship with Muhammad Ali, they asked him, are you his spiritual advisor? And he did not say, yes, he's a student of mine and a protege and I have been raising him and working hard. No, he gave this man one of the highest degrees of respect. He said that he has an intellect of his own. I merely say what I believe in front of him. He has a mind of his own and he makes his own decisions. And these are the words of a true leader. Leaders don't want to leave behind students. Leaders don't want to leave behind followers. Leaders want to leave behind them leaders. And this was the case with the Prophet ﷺ. He left behind the Sahaba, the greatest of leaders that the earth has ever seen after the Prophets. In changing his name, set an example of racial pride. And this was even when surrounded by, you had the media, you had the government, the systems that were in place. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what are we doing to set the standards of Islamic pride? Where is our Islamic pride? How proudly do we wear our Islam on our chests? We should wear it very proudly. As Malcolm X, he set a standard and he became an icon. We too can set a standard and become icons of Islamic pride and pride in our communities. In 1966, his arrest, as we mentioned, many lessons can be taken from this. Sacrifice of status, fame and wealth, principle-based decisions. When he was questioned by the media about what were the reasons behind him refusing to join the military, he stated that we as Muslims, we don't fight against those that have not harmed us or oppressed us, and so on and so forth. And so he was making a decision based upon principles. And Islam is a principle-based way of life. We make our decisions based upon principles. We do not give in to conformitism. We do not conform with society just to be a part of the society around us. We enter into a society and we bring our principles with us, as these are principles given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these principles are better for the people that are around us, even if they don't know it yet. So we should be proud to make decisions based upon our principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala later raised the rank of Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, as we now know, due to what? Not due to his boxing skills, but due to his sacrifice, due to the work that he gave in the political arena, in the arena of charitable acts. He was a man who had God on his mind, as he said, that when I retire, I'm going to devote myself to Islam, devote myself to religion, Islam being his religion, and charitable work. He sacrificed for his principles. He sacrificed for what he thought was right. He gave up being the heavyweight champion of the world, being one of the most beloved sports personalities at the time. He became an enemy for a short period of time of the media, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised his rank after that to heights that he would have not have achieved if he was merely a champion of the world. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever leaves off something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him something better than that. So when we are faced with something that conflicts with Islam or the principles of Islam, we should make the decision that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for the result, this is left to Allah. And the result will always be good. Whether we perceive it to be good or we don't perceive it to be good, the result is good. As long as we are doing that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another lesson from Muhammad Ali, his wordplay. As we know that he was an artist with his words. And he made many statements that have remained after his death. And it shows the importance. And we mentioned previously one of the reasons why he was not drafted into the army in his early years, due to the fact that he had a substandard level of literacy, as mentioned. But yet this did not stop him from using the skills that he had. He was a great orator. And so he would use that for the mission that he saw befitting for his life, whether that was in boxing, whether that was in political arena. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we do with our words? Words play a very important part in getting a message across. And so perhaps we have a skill that we haven't yet tried to utilize. So we should try to use our words, try to develop our skills in speaking and writing, and use these to get messages across. And some even go so far to say that Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he was a part of what paved the way to what became early hip-hop, as early hip-hop was very political. It was a very political movement, and it was based upon wordplay and rhymes. And Muhammad Ali, before hip-hop was around, he was doing what hip-hop artists later on went on to do, playing with words, getting messages across. So what can we do with our words? Spoken word, poetry, for example. It's very important for the youth to try and get into avenues which will call other youth according to what the youth are using in our time. Something which perhaps is similar to Malcolm X, the fact that he went through change publicly. He publicly left off what he had been raised upon, entered into the nation of Islam, and then he publicly left off the nation of Islam and entered into Sunni Islam, mainstream Islam, and then he publicly later on in his life adopted a more spiritual form of Islam as well. And so this shows a man of ikhlas. For someone to publicly change their views and announce that to the world, and you're talking about the highest level of publicity in regards to Muhammad Ali, even higher levels of publicity than Malcolm X. And this shows the ikhlas of this man, that he went through these stages publicly. He did not allow his public persona to prevent him from entering into that which he saw and that which was the truth. And it's ikhlas. Remember, we mentioned in the beginning that it's not the skills and the abilities of these men that made them great. It was something else. And the main thing, it goes back to the heart. Having ikhlas and having sidq. The Prophet ﷺ, he said what? As-sidqu yahdi ila al-birr, wal-birru yahdi ila al-jannah. That truthfulness of the heart and truthfulness of the tongue leads to piety, and piety leads to Jannah. And the opposite is true, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said that al-kadhib yahdi ila al-fujur, wal-fujuru yahdi ila al-nar. That lying and having a heart which is in a state of denying or lying leads to immorality, and immorality leads to the hellfire. And being truthful is not just with the tongue, it's a state of the heart. Being truthful can mean accepting the truth when it comes to you. And lying can be lying with the heart. You know that this is the truth, but you refuse to accept it. And when this takes place, the heart can become hardened, and the truth will no longer enter into it, and this is what will lead a person to the hellfire. And this can be related to shaitan, Iblis himself. Iblis knew the truth of the message, but he denied the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so he was condemned to hellfire for eternity. Abu Jahl, the same thing. The head of the munafiqeen, the same thing. Those that did not believe in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the problem was not because they didn't have the signs. The problem was they did not allow the truth to enter their heart, and they denounced it with their heart. They lied to themselves. And so this is what led to the hellfire. So we need to rectify our hearts and look into our hearts and ask ourselves, what state is my heart in? What state is my heart in? And they say that the tongue is the minister of the heart. Whatever is on the heart comes out on the tongue. So if a person is lying all the time, he needs to look at his heart. If a person is a truthful person, he should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase him in truthfulness and in steadfastness. Something which perhaps not many know is that he was named after his father, Cassius Clay, who was also named after a Republican politician who was he was against slavery basically, and he worked for the abolishment of slavery. So his father was named after a political person, someone who fought for the rights of black people at the time. And it's strange, as he was a Republican. And Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he was named after his father before becoming Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay. But there's a lesson that we should take from this. What do we name our children? As the names have an impact upon the child. If you name a person Abdullah and you teach them what this means, this inshallah will have an impact on this child. If we name our children after the great names of the men and women of our ummah, perhaps one day they will aspire to be like these people. And the Prophet ﷺ, he would change people's names and give them positive names. And sometimes you meet some people, for example, those who have the name Umar. I've met many people, they have the name Umar, mashallah, tabarakallah, they have similar qualities. And so perhaps the name has a direct impact on the person's personality. So we should choose the names that we have for our children wisely. An account which is mentioned, which took place in his childhood, that he was denied water in a store. His mother mentioned this incident at a young age. Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he was denied water at a store due to the color of his skin, and she mentioned that this had a big impact on his life. And this is something that we need to ask ourselves, as the people that denied the water to him were most likely who? Adults. What impact are we having on the children around us? Perhaps you'll find some children in a masjid, you smile at them and stroke their heads, and you give them a nice impression, or you shout at them and turn them away, and it might scar them for the rest of their life. Perhaps you might give them an inspiring word. We don't realize sometimes that our words have a big impact on the children, and we can have a big impact on the children. Just encouraging them to do something good, it may be the reason that they do this good for the rest of their life. And this is inside our homes and outside our homes. As the statement goes, someone mentioned earlier, it takes a village to raise a child. And so raising a child is a community effort. And so those children that we see running around us, they are our children as well. We should see these children as our children. We should put effort into these children as if they were our children, and wish for them the best. So we should be wary of the impact that we have. And it's not only with children, with everyone. A believer encourages other believers. He puts confidence into other believers. He does not put a believer down. He is a positive individual, and he gives that positivity to others. What got him into boxing? We mentioned this, the thief and the bike, and also something else, losing his boxing license. These two events, you can see that at first they can be seen as negative events, someone losing his bike, but it had a profound change on the life of Muhammad Ali rahimahullah. He went into boxing and he became the political activist. He became the Muslim icon that we know him as today. And so something bad might take place in your life. Don't see it as bad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only decrees that which is good. And when the Prophet ﷺ, he said to believe in the qadr, khayrihi wa sharrihi, the good of it and the evil of it, what did the Prophet ﷺ mean? Means that which is perceived to be evil. That which is perceived to be evil. The qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the mu'min is always good. If something bad happens to a believer due to his sins, it's a reminder from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to change his ways. And if something bad happens to a believer who is righteous and upright, it's a means of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purifying him and raising his rank. And we could look at, for example, precious metals. Precious metals, they have to be burnt before they their beauty is realized. So we should never see bad events taking place in our lives as bad for us. In fact, they are good. And the events which are taking place in the ummah today, although tragic, we can see a lot of good from this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choosing His slaves and blessing them with the best of endings, and also preparing our ummah for that which is coming. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you look throughout history, whenever there has been a revival in Islam, there has always been before that revival a time of hardship and a time of disunity and a time of struggle. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He raises the ranks of the men that struggle to bring about the revival of Islam. So again, we don't need to be upset and worried about the state of Islam. We need to be upset and worried about our status. And are we going to take part in the revival of Islam and that which is coming? This is a question that every single person has to ask, as every single person has to play a role in the revival of Islam, whether it be in his household, his community, in the ummah at large. Something which, although I did not check the authenticity of this, an account which is mentioned that he was denied, he went to Sugar Ray Robinson, and Sugar Ray Robinson, one of the best boxers in boxing history, and he was an idol of Muhammad Ali. The word idol perhaps shouldn't be used, but he looked up to Sugar Ray Robinson, and he requested from him to become his trainer, and he refused. He bluntly refused the opportunity to be the trainer of Muhammad Ali. And so you ask yourself, what would have become of Muhammad Ali had Sugar Ray Robinson taken up the training position? And perhaps we could say that Sugar Ray lost out, as Muhammad Ali would have been seen as one of his students. And this goes back to something which took place in the seerah as well. Never overlook someone. Never look at someone and look down at them. Never look at them for what you see. It's not about the face value. You don't know the rank that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give someone tomorrow. And so we should never turn away from someone that comes to us looking for help. Of course, the Sugar Ray Robinson, if it's true, had his reasons. And Muhammad Ali, he benefited from this anyway. Everything is decreed. But we can learn a lesson, which is we should never turn down an opportunity to help another person, and we should never overlook. Sometimes someone may come to us, and due to their status, we will help them. And someone else will come to us, and due to their lack of status, we will refuse them help. But this was not the way of the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down a verse discouraging the Prophet ﷺ from this type of behavior. When the blind man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ, he turned away. Did you say something? And the Prophet ﷺ, he turned away as he was dealing with some of the leaders of Quraysh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discouraged the Prophet ﷺ from this type of action and said, perhaps this man he's truly seeking guidance, and spiritual attainment will enter into his heart. So we should try to be wary of who we turn away. We should not turn away anyone as far as we're capable of. As of course we can't always help everyone. Mentioned over and over again that Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he had the heart of a champion. The fight with Sonny Liston, the fight with Joe Frazier, the fight with George Foreman. George Foreman and Sonny Liston, both of these fights, he was completely written off before the fight. George Foreman, as we mentioned, even his own close friends that had been with him throughout his whole career, they did not, and they publicly said that he's not going to win. Yet he done it twice. He beat them twice, which shows that it was not about his skills, it was about his heart. And in fact, he developed a new unconventional technique to fight with in his later years, the rope-a-dope. Basically taking as much pain until the person tires out and then beating them when they're tired. This shows the heart that this man had. To take a beating for 15, 14, 13 rounds, this is only heart. And we have to ask ourselves, what heart do we have? How far are we willing to go? How far will our hearts take us for the sake of Islam and for the sake of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Something which Joe Frazier and the insults, anyone who's seen some of the interviews or read about what took place between Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali rahimahullah will know that there were some very deep insults that were exchanged between them. But there's one that I would like to focus on. Muhammad Ali rahimahullah spoke about the ghetto, and he spoke about coming from the ghetto, and he accused Joe Frazier of representing the white establishment, which perhaps could be disputed, but it was a part of his showmanship. But there's something that I think we should focus on, which is the way that the black community at the time saw the ghetto and ghettoism. Today we find that it is celebrated, whereas in those times it was not celebrated. In fact, the black community were trying to break away from the ghetto mentality. They were trying to break away from a lack of education. They were trying to imitate the dress codes of those who they saw to be educated. Whereas today, we find not only the black community, but the poorer communities, they now celebrate ghetto culture. They celebrate ghettoism. Why is this? What happened? And I would be bold enough to say that the powers that be have utilized the tools that they have. For example, when you look at hip-hop culture, when you look at sports personalities, they promote this type of ghettoism. They promote lack of education. They promote, for example, wearing clothing which is not befitting of a grown man. They promote what else do they promote? Illicit behaviors, alcoholism, drug use. For example, you can quote some of the famous rappers from the 1990s. Some of their raps were only about drugs. How many people became extremely addicted to drugs due to these lyrics? And then they would have the cheek to say that they're in support of movements like Black Lives Matter. If they were really in support of bettering the black communities and the poorer communities, then they would aspire to educate their communities. They would aspire to encourage their communities to educate themselves. And ghetto culture is something which has been utilized and used by the governments to keep people oppressed, to keep people suppressed. If you look at hip-hop culture, and I say reading, not listening to, if you read about the history of hip-hop, and you read about hip-hop culture, it was a very political, anti-establishment movement, but it was later turned into a form of seediness and corruption and spreading disgusting behaviors which are extremely negative for society. So we have to look at this and ask ourselves about our inclinations. What do we represent? In 1973, 1973, this was the year before Muhammad Ali, I believe he beat George Foreman. Ken Norton, he broke his jaw. Again, he didn't stop. It relates back to the heart. He broke his jaw. A year later, he was fighting, and he won the heavyweight title, or he defended the heavyweight title. This goes back to what we were saying earlier. The boxers of that era, they were not of the same degree as the boxers of this time, and this is something which represents our communities at large. They were willing to go the distances for whatever it was they were fighting for, whether in the political arena, whether in the sports arena. Whereas our generation, you see that we've become very comfortable, we become very lazy, we become very soft. We don't have that manhood anymore. 1974, George Foreman, one of the hardest hitters of the century. Again, we mentioned this, the rope-a-dope, we mentioned all of this stuff. Something, one of Muhammad Ali's marriages, his first marriage, he apparently sent a little letter upon divorcing his first wife, and he complained. Well, he mentioned one of the reasons that he divorced his first wife being that she was not adhering to the dress code that she was required to adhere to. And so he sent, what has been mentioned is that he sent a letter saying, "You traded heaven for hell, baby." And this is something which I think we can benefit from. What dress code are our women adhering to? And Islam has a set of rules when it comes to hijab and when it comes to what the women look like when they go outside. And Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he said this, you've traded heaven for hell. And this is a very powerful statement, because perhaps we don't take into consideration what we are doing before we leave our houses. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that a woman who leaves her household and she's not dressed properly, she'll be sinning every time a person looks at her. And so imagine how many looks, and today we're living in a very predatory society. How many looks will a person receive from walking from her household to the shop, to the bus stop? And the same can be applied to the men. Perhaps not in the hadith, but a man should dress in a certain way. A man should take into consideration that which is modest. As Imam Shakil mentioned earlier, that haya is not only for women, haya is for men as well. And from haya is the way that you dress, the type of clothing that a person chooses to wear. Umar al-An is famously mentioned that Umar al-An, he sent a young man out of Medina due to the fitna that he was causing for the women, due to his good looks and so on and so forth. And so perhaps we could see that men can also be a fitna for women, and so men should take this into consideration when they're dressing, when the way that they handle themselves. So we should contemplate and think about what we're doing before we leave our households, for the women especially. How are the women dressing? And maybe they should ask themselves before they leave the house, today am I trading heaven for hell? It's a deep saying. Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he said, this is the statement that I mentioned earlier, and I would like everyone to listen carefully to this and ask themselves, how does this relate to us? Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, he said, I am America, I am the part of you that you won't recognize, but get used to me. I'm black, I'm confident, I'm cocky, my name not yours, my religion not yours, my goals my own, get used to me. How does this relate to us today? It's a question. He said, I am America, I am the part of you that you won't recognize, but get used to me. I'm black, I'm confident, I'm cocky, my name not yours, my religion not yours, my goals my own, get used to me. How does it relate to us? Anyone? Yeah, we can apply the same statement. Yeah, let's change it up. Should we change it? Khalas, you come and read it out then. He's saying, I am America. If someone that's born and raised here, what culture do they have? British. What language do they speak? So when someone tells me you need to adhere to, or you need to, no, not go back home. When they say you need to conform to our British values, what British values are you talking about? Do I not represent British values? Did I not go through your educational system? Did I not go to nursery, primary school, secondary, college, university? If I didn't get the British values through that entire time, where am I going to get them from? So, if we were to say, I wouldn't exactly say I am Britain, but we could say that we are British. Yeah, and I am the part of you that you won't recognize. This is relevant to us today. How many times, I remember reading an article recently, they were discussing the assimilation of Muslims and how Muslims are not assimilating. The mayor of London today, what color is his skin? Brown. What religion does he ascribe to? Islam. I don't think you can assimilate further than that, becoming the mayor of the biggest city of the country. And so we should challenge these types of statements.
But when it comes to assimilation is because it's a word that the laicity people use it too much, which means you have to change, you have to be like us.
That's what I'm saying.
What they mean by like.
But this is my point. What does it mean? The British value. What do British values mean? Are we not already a part of the British system? Are we not already a part of Britain? Do we not already make up a part of this country? Of course we do, and we've done so for the last 200 to 300 years at the very least. And he says, but get used to me. He's saying black. We could say Muslim, confident, cocky. These three, we should take these on ourselves. Muslim, confident, and cocky. If you speak to me, I'm going to speak back. If you want to try and push your views upon me, I'm going to push my views back upon you. This is what, apart from British values, we have freedom of speech, no? So we should question and we should stand up against these tactics which are used against us. He says, my name, not yours. When we ask what is a British name, we should look at the prominent names in UK today. I'm sure you're going to have some Ahmeds and Muhammads. So, khalas, this is a part of British culture and society now. When we say, my religion and not yours. British values, if we're talking about a secularist country, are values defined by religion? Do I have to stick to your religious values for me to be considered British? If that's the case, what about the Jewish community? What about the Buddhist community? What about the Hindu community? What about the political community? Because politics in of itself, you can't separate politics from religion. It's not possible. Politics are always based upon a set of principles, and principles come from a person's belief system. And so you have to ask yourself, what does religion mean? My goals, my own, get used to me. You have how many prime ministers now? They've spoken about how charitable the Muslim community is. Why are we charitable? What are our aims and goals when we're charitable? To serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hajj in 1972, we already spoke about it, how inspirational Hajj can be for a person. And from the signs of an accepted Hajj or Umrah is that a person changes his life after that. A person increases in his closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And perhaps you can look at Muhammad Ali rahimahullah and Malcolm X, and you can see this. Malcolm X, he was assassinated a year after he came back from Hajj, I believe so, or in the same year. And he had entered into Sunni Islam. He changed his system of values and beliefs, and he had started to adhere to mainstream Sunni Islam, to the truth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to bless him with the best of endings just after he had performed Hajj. So if that's not a good sign, then what is a good sign? Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, after coming back from Hajj, as we mentioned in the 70s, he entered into mainstream Sunni Islam, and he led a life of political activism and being a charitable individual, helping wherever he could. And so these are good signs, inshallah, that their Hajj was accepted, and we should all aspire to try and perform Hajj sooner rather than later. Ali rahimahullah, he stated, political leaders should use their position to bring understanding about the religion of Islam. This was the statement of Muhammad Ali rahimahullah, and he did so. He used his position to spread the message of Islam and to show the beauty of Islam. Again, the question comes up, what are we using our positions for? Perhaps a person is a teacher. Perhaps a person works in a hospital. Perhaps a person works amongst politicians. Perhaps a person works in a council. Perhaps a person works in a shop. There is no position which a person should overlook. No person should look down upon themselves. They should use the position that they have to serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Collective activism. This is what Islam is. We discussed the statement, robbed of his prime years. And lastly, we'll close inshallah with his rank. As we mentioned, we see early on in his life that he was stripped of his championship, of his belts, of his boxing licenses, of his status and fame. He was made one of the public enemies at the time, but yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised his rank. And the media, the same media that used to attack him, they started to adore him. Whether they liked it or not, they adored him and they sang his praises. When he passed away, CNN, BBC, all of the main news companies, they ran shows about him for at least a week. The world leaders attended his funeral. The biggest celebrities on the face of the planet at the time all sang his praises, and this was after he sacrificed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based upon his principles. He didn't conform so as to save his name and save that which he had achieved in the dunya. He gave it all up due to his principles, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised his rank higher than the people that he would have tried to please could have ever raised his rank. And so when we are faced with issues, we don't need to think about other than pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise our ranks in the dunya before the akhirah, whether as individuals or collectively. As Yusuf alayhi salam, the story of Yusuf, the greatest example when it comes to this, imprisoned due to his belief. He refused the wife of the minister, or the wife of a minister of Egypt, and he had status at the time. He could go wherever he wanted in Egypt at the time due to him being an adopted son of a minister. He gave it all up. Why? To please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took him out of that test, he made him a minister himself. And he gave him the keys to Egypt. And he could travel in the world as he so wished, being a part of the most powerful government on the earth at the time. And so this short story of Yusuf alayhi salam is a story which we should try to apply in our lives. Whenever we face difficult situations, we make the right choice for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.